everyone, and thank you for joining us here at the Australia Pavilion at COP30 Belém. It's wonderful to be here in Brazil and to see such a strong Asia-Pacific presence, a region that is fast becoming one of the most exciting and diverse frontiers for offshore wind development. And that's the focus of our discussion today. Now, for those of you who are new to the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, or GOA, GOA was co-founded by the Government of Denmark, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and the Global Wind Energy Council. I'm Amisha Patel, the head of Secretariat for GOA. Together, we bring together governments, industry, and international organizations to accelerate the deployment of offshore wind worldwide, a critical solution to advancing the global goal to triple renewable energy by 2030. Over the last year, GOA has worked closely with partners across the North Sea, Latin America, and Asia Pacific, exploring how strong regional and global collaboration can accelerate progress. Through shared infrastructure, joint supply chain strategies, and of course, all-important knowledge exchange. With markets such as Australia, Japan, Korea, and the Philippines now moving forward with clear policy signals and auctions, the timing for regional cooperation couldn't be better. Earlier this year, we had the pleasure of joining Solutions for Our Climate, SFOC, at Our Ocean Conference in Busan, South Korea, where together we advanced a global dialogue on coexistence between offshore wind and ocean protection. And today, I am delighted to announce that SFOC has officially joined the Global Offshore Wind Alliance. SFOC has been an influential voice for climate ambition, ocean stewardship, and renewable energy leadership across Asia and globally, and we are thrilled to welcome them to our community. Please join me in congratulating Joo-jeon Kim and the team, the Executive Director of SFOC. And Joo-jeon, if I can invite you up here for a photo moment with our co-founders and GWEC Chair, and then I'll hand over the mic to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Amisha. Should I use that one? Okay. Thank you, Amisha. It's an honor to join you today at this important gathering focused on offshore wind in the Asia Pacific. I'm proud to announce that SFOC, Solutions for Our Climate, has joined GOA. This reflects and reaffirms our commitment to shaping global offshore wind discussions and accelerating the transition to clean renewable energy. Our team started out in 2016 with the goal to limit global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees C, phasing out fossil fuels, expanding renewables, and accelerating industrial decarbonization. Over the past 10 years, we've seen how climate discussions take shape in Korea, growing from its nascent stages to include more advocates and contributors. Yet, unfortunately, the progress has not been as fast as it has to be. Our offshore wind deployment, South Korea, is at 300 megawatts, only 300 megawatts. This is just over 2% of the country's 2030 capacity, and we'll get there. It took years for the MSP, Maritime Spatial Planning discussions, to take place, and 2 years for the Offshore Wind Promotion Act to pass from our legislature. But what we have also seen in the 10 years is how, but we also seen how in the 10 years is how countries can motivate and push each other to make progress. One example, actually, about 5 years ago, when South Korea made an announcement to stop state-backed overseas coal financing in 2021, Japan followed 4 weeks later, and 4 months later, China also followed. a very short period of time, in 5 months. It's now time we see such synergy in offshore wind for regional efforts and collaboration to push for renewable energy expansion and offshore development. 2 years ago at COP28, as many will know, 130 parties pledged to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. The next few years will be critical to realize this goal. Countries should not only set ambitious targets and roadmaps, but follow through with workable and proven approaches. Governments, industry leaders, and civil society should also collaborate to share insights, exchange best practices, and support scalable, actionable solutions for offshore wind. Together with GOA members, we look very much forward to advancing offshore wind in the Asia-Pacific region. The challenge we have is great, but so is the opportunity. By collaborating across borders, industries, and sectors, we can accelerate the growth of offshore wind and make a tangible impact on climate action. I'm excited for the partnerships and progress that will emerge from today's discussions. Unfortunately, I have to leave a bit early, and I look forward to what we can do together in the APAC region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yujin, and welcome SFOC. Now I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Catherine Thomas, GOA's International Communication Manager, to take us through our next panel session. So Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Amisha. As Amisha mentioned, my name is Catherine Thomas. I'm the International Communications Manager at the Global Offshore Wind Alliance. It's such a pleasure to be in the Australian Pavilion today. As an Australian living in Denmark abroad, it's especially nice for me to just feel a sense of home, so I'm very happy to be here today. This is the second time that we've been here. Yesterday, GOA was involved in some discussions about the progress of offshore wind in Australia and how it's benefiting the economy on a local level. So it feels very fitting to be back here today and elevate that conversation to a regional level to talk about how we can work together in the APAC region to strengthen offshore wind deployment. The other development is the fan, and I have to say it's very well appreciated from yesterday, so happy to be back here. I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic group of panelists, and I'm sure everyone's very excited to hear from them. So I will pass the mic across, and we'll hear some introductions about who our panelists are, their roles and their involvement in the offshore wind industry.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Rebecca Williams. I'm Deputy CEO at the Global Wind Energy Council, and I'm also delighted by the fan, although it is blowing my hair kind of across my face in a very windy fashion, which is probably quite good for the sector I represent. So I'm also liking the fan. How much do you want us to introduce ourselves? Keep going, or pass one by one? So I'll offer some introductory comments, but I'll do that in a second once we've just introduced the rest of the panel.
Yeah, hi, good to see you. Also enjoying the fan compared to yesterday. Maybe not having that much hair to can throw around, but Michael Hannibal, chairman of GVEC, partner in CIP, and chief commercial in Stiesdal Offshore Floating Foundations.
Hello, and thank you for having me, Goa, and thank you, Catherine, as well. I'm Angela Catt, and I'm on the board of the Clean Energy Council. So this is one of the largest industry bodies dedicated to clean energy in Australia.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. I'm Sehi, and I lead the diplomacy team at Solutions for Our Climate. Our CEO is still here. We are a nonprofit based in Seoul, focusing mostly on power, industrial, and transport sector decarbonization. And we're very happy to be part of GOA as of today.
Thank you, and nice to hear from you all. Given that we're in the Australian Pavilion today, I think it's only fitting that we start with a question for Australia. So Ange, we'll jump straight to you. First question is, how is the current state of play in offshore wind in Australia, and what are some of the main lessons learned so far?
Well, firstly, I just want to say offshore wind is needed in Australia. We need offshore wind in Australia. If you look at our 2035 emissions reduction target, that is 62 to 70% reduction. And then what that means practically is 5 gigawatts of wind being implemented and installed every year. That's a large number. And in 2025, not one wind project has reached financial close. So, do we have a challenge reaching the goal? I would say yes. But do we have a solution in adding offshore wind to the portfolio? 100%. And look, just more practically on the Australian wind industry, I think Australia's done a very good job of setting up some strong foundations very quickly. We've implemented laws, we've implemented very supportive regulations very quickly. And then in addition to that, we've declared 6 offshore clean energy zones. We've allocated 13 licenses. So we've made some good progress. But now is the time for the next step, that next action. And so that next action is the right policy support to provide that additional revenue and make this a reality.
Thank you, and some really strong words there. You and I were talking before, as I mentioned, recently we had an Australian delegation come to Denmark and do a tour of the Nordics, and the theme was regional collaboration, and they were learning on some models from the European countries, specifically around the North Sea, speaking to regional collaboration and drawing on these examples and from other regions. In your experience, there are some lessons. What lessons stand out to you which could be applied to the APAC region? What lessons have already been drawn on, and how do you think this will benefit Australia?
Well, I think we can look at a number of countries and how they've been able to support and make reality for the offshore wind industry. If we look at Germany, if we look at the UK, we look at Taiwan, they've really sent strong signals to investors and strong signals to suppliers. And that is absolutely key. So what do we need in Australia? We need that here. And that could look like a number of things. It could be the completion of the Victorian auction process. It could be an expansion of the capacity investment scheme where we have one set up specifically for offshore wind. So there's many ways that this could look and really become a reality. But on the ground, I've seen 3 really incredible aspects and learnings from overseas, just very practically. So firstly, the jobs and transition planning for those jobs has been incredible. And so, the transition of the jobs, especially from Star of the South, for transitioning from coal jobs over to renewable energy jobs, very practical, very engaged communities, really taking good lessons from the UK. And then if you're looking at robust supply chain design with local opportunities, we've done an assessment across the whole of Australia of what steel making and what fabrication facilities are available, and then giving those local partners opportunities to meet with the global suppliers and supply chain. So, and the last third one, and also very important, building on yesterday, is leading community and First Nations engagement.
Thank you for that. And I think your comment about communities leads well into the next question. So this one's for you, Sehi, and Michael, if you want to jump in afterwards, you're welcome to. So Sehi, how can the narrative of APAC as a global offshore wind hub be communicated and translated into meaningful regional cooperation and local benefits that reach communities?
So as you mentioned, the Asia Pacific does have a great potential for offshore wind deployment, but the reality is that many APAC countries face shared challenges. So regulatory frameworks, permitting lags, and also grid integration. So in the case of Korea, since you also shared a little bit about the state of offshore wind development in Australia, I do want to say that Korea, as of July, we have a new government with a very strong political will to deploy renewables at an accelerated pace. And in the recent announcement that the government made, they hope to achieve 100 gigawatts of renewables by 2030, and offshore will be key to achieving that target. But the license capacity for early stage wind power projects is 20.8% gigawatts, which is exceeding the 2030 target of 12 gigawatts, but the actual deployment is only 300 megawatts, like Jujin mentioned in his speech. So that means that over 99% of the projects face delays due to permitting. So these shared challenges create a good foundation for cross-regional learnings and cooperation. And countries in the early stages of offshore wind can benefit by exchanging lessons from successful projects in the region, helping them adopt solutions that really fit the local context. So, and another area for collaboration is regional supply chain development. So stronger supply chain can reduce costs, improve efficiency, and avoid duplication in manufacturing and logistics, and keep the economic benefits within local communities. But technical progress alone isn't enough. We also need these compelling stories from the region. So coming not only from the climate and energy experts like yourselves and ourselves, but also from influential voices like the governors, the members of the parliament, and communities, and through the mouths of who we call domestic climate champions. And so these stories should highlight social, economic, and also developmental impacts, not only the environmental impacts, and how these benefits can be achieved. So to sum up, so governments, civil society organizations, local companies, and international partners all have a role to play in amplifying these stories and building political support in the region.
Thank you. Michael, did you want to come in on that one too?
Yeah, happy to do so. First, a lot of good things said, and also I'm sure Korea will do really good. As CIP, we have invested in Korea and the offshore. So to the APAC region, for those who do not know, I do have a long background as Siemens Wind Power CEO. So the supply chain side, what is important, and as CIP, the developer side, what is important. The cool thing is it's a little bit the same thing that is important. That's a pipeline of projects. And it's easier as a region to create a convincing pipeline of projects, because then you're not alone as one country. You simply bundle it up in the region. That then requires the collaboration, as mentioned, the regional collaboration, that the region is kind of sending the signals, yes, we want to collaborate. And luckily, we had a fantastic session in the APAC Wind Summit in Melbourne, where basically all the countries in the APAC region more or less was represented, and all of them expressed a strong signal of collaboration, because that's needed. And the cool thing in that meeting was that a number of the OEMs, manufacturers, they said, okay, if you can establish that kind of pipeline with these kind of signals of collaboration, then it will attract suppliers as well. And then as a developer, what if I take that hat on, what we look at is, of course, can there be a repeat project? Is there a coming project? Is there a coming pipeline? Is there transparency for either in an auctioning system where you can see you do a lot of early investments, but you hope that there will then be a second opportunity, a third opportunity, because maybe all the developers cannot win in the first auction. But it's fine if there's then a consecutive go, so that the DevEx can be an investment for the future and not a lost investment. And then thirdly, what is important? Now there was mentioned regulatory frameworks. What is important is that when the APAC region built itself up, that it maybe look at what can we do, what can we learn of the good things and not take the bad things. And that is implementing regimes where you basically do a relatively low DevEx spend to get to a certainty. And then the investors, they are willing to spend more, instead of having markets where you have a tremendously high DevEx, because then the developers, they will move to another market. So pretty early in the process, there needs to be somehow certainty on what you are doing. because else you will find another more attractive market. But having said that, the APAC region have so many opportunities and a few challenges, but jointly I think we have all the learnings to tackle the challenges, and then there are a couple of new ones. It's not the technology, it's not the capital, it's kind of the decision of now we go do it.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Sejin. I think you made a really strong point there. Without collaboration, we're not going to see progress. And so on that note, Rebecca, I'm going to throw this one over to you. What areas is regional collaboration progressing within APAC? And are there countries in the region that are already championing this agenda and playing a leading role?
Well, as Michael said, the last time that some of us were together was actually in Melbourne, so it's great to be back here in the kind of mini Australian context to talk about this topic again. And at that summit, I mean, we were reflecting on some of the broader trends in wind more generally across the world, and then Asia's role, APAC's role within those trends too. And when we look at the wind sector more broadly, I think it is an important moment right now. So we have had these challenges, some headwinds have affected the sector, and we're also facing, a barrage of criticism from some particular governments and some particular people. But actually, what was coming through very strongly at the APAC Wind Energy Summit was that the fundamentals of offshore wind have absolutely not changed. The huge amount of opportunity is still there. The desire for pipeline is still there. And actually, in lots of countries with lots of governments, we feel that we have better political support than ever. But it is a moment where we need to work really closely together as industry and governments to now chart a course forwards. And I think one of the key areas that we can do that is in auction design, auction reform, and tenders. And I just want to underscore some of the points that Michael was making there around pipelines and tenders. And I would say a key theme out of the discussions that we had in Melbourne was how we can stack these tenders together. Perhaps the first place that we could see that kind of collaboration in APAC is just simply by putting together a stacked tender pipeline or a pipeline of capacity so that investors like Michael's company can take a look at that and see, okay, there is enough capacity here for us to then make the move and for us to invest here. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity and something as representatives of different APAC nations in this audience, we should definitely be taking forward as an easy and quick win. The second piece maybe is slightly more complicated. It's a longer term aspiration, but looking at supply chain cooperation, it's absolutely crystal clear that no one country within the Asia Pacific region can do this alone. We're really going to have to bring together different countries who have different strengths and weaknesses, really consider the industrial capabilities of those countries and how we can together formulate a supply chain that works at a regional level. A quick plug for the work that me and my team have been doing, some of whom are here today, and paying testament also to the diplomatic power and clout of GOA in bringing together these conversations. But we've been doing a bunch of different work, research on the behind-the-scenes underpinning of what do we actually mean by regional collaboration on supply chain, and which particular segments, areas, etc., could we use as first movers in this endeavor. I think there's definitely a role for us to look at standards as a way of perhaps facilitating some of that early supply chain collaboration in a way that's not so highly political and could be achieved. So there are already lots of movements towards having tangible and proper cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region on offshore wind. I'm really excited to see how this comes together, and I want to pay tribute to GOA and to the other members on this panel also for their hard work in contributing to this agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we've talked about policy, we've talked about governance, we've talked about frameworks. I'm interested to know from an industry perspective, staying with you, Rebecca and Michael, if you want to chip in, and maybe Ange from an Australia perspective, talking about investment. So to encourage domestic and international investors to participate in regional infrastructure projects, what policy and institutional frameworks need to be prioritized to get the investment off the ground?
Maybe I'll start, but I have a feeling that some of us might make the same points. Since we're here in Australia, sort of, maybe we can begin by also talking about the real need for that strong signal to be sent between the federal and state level when it comes to things like auctions and tenders. So Michael was talking about investment. There was already this conversation around investment and how we channel that through a pipeline. if there is not an aligned approach between government and between the federal and state level governments, you know, it becomes harder then to really see a very concrete path forward for that investment. And maybe reflecting on the Australian moment, I think that's the moment the industry finds itself in right now, where, you know, there's some more complex dynamics when it comes to that federal and state level relationship. But actually, I think there's a clear path forward, as we'd already been saying. And really, I think a huge statement of confidence in the Australian market would now be to push ahead with the Victorian auction and really make that, you know, the first proof point of offshore wind in Australia. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity, and I know that that's one that this panel will be working towards in unison, I'm sure. So really it is about having that confidence for investors in the frameworks, but also, you know, when the going gets tough, industry and government working together concretely to find solutions. And that's the moment that we're in Australia. I think it's the moment that we're in some other markets where we have some harder choices to make about how we have that collaboration and where the burden of risk lies. But, you know, I think it's time that we had that honest conversation and really pushed forward. Thanks.
It's a really good question, and thanks for taking a lot of what I wanted to say, but that's okay. I have another thing, or a couple of other things. Capital have the tendency to flow to markets where there are a reasonable risk-balanced return. If that get out of proportion, then it's moving elsewhere. So that's one important thing, and that's where public-private finance and public-private collaboration will help. One of the elements, that's grid, where public finance definitely can unlock a number of projects in the region of APAC, but actually globally, so that grid will be taken out of the equation. Then there are certain markets where you can say high growth, middle income markets, where some public funding can be concessional finance, it can be different ways of de-risking the early DevEx of a project, potentially grants or something like that, simply to attract that it's a fully bankable market where the debt finance will not be too expensive. That's important.
I think those were absolutely perfect answers and really covered it. All I'll add is just one sentence, and that's that we have a lot of the institutions to deliver this already set up. We've got the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, they're here today. We've got ARENA, they're here as well. So let's all reach out and tap them on the shoulder.
Thank you, everyone. That was good. I think that also leads in well to our next question. So we'll stay with you, Ange, and then Rebecca, feel free to chime in into this too. So with shifting trade policies and geopolitical developments shaping supply chains, what strategies can Asia-Pacific countries pursue to maintain cooperation and ensure stable offshore wind development?
Thank you. I just have to say I really enjoyed your remarks earlier about collaboration with Korea. So welcome to Goa. It is great to have you part of it. Australia is very happy and Victoria are very happy to be part of it and part of it with you. There are a lot of opportunities to work together to leverage things that are already in place in other regions. You know, we have vessel building, we have turbine building elsewhere. We've already had some incredible engagement with Australian local manufacturers and then international suppliers and OEMs coming in to see how that we can partner. So setting up these sorts of frameworks, and something maybe we can do together as well is working together. Let's let the people meet and then we'll form the right relationships to deliver the right outcomes. That would be my part. And the only other point I would add is Australia's part and each country's part is then delivering the right pipeline and aligning our pipelines. I 100% agree with that comment, Michael.
Yeah, well, I think with all this shifting geopolitics and, you know, uncertainty, actually, there's a huge opportunity for the Asia-Pacific region and a huge opportunity also maybe for Australia if, you know, whatever happens with the COP hosting, we still don't know, but if Australia do then get the COP hosting, I think a really important opportunity for this country to, you know, play a very strong role at the next COP in those kinds of discussions. but you know, I mean, let's tackle the elephant in the room. The US situation around trade and geopolitics has been significant. However, I think that it's all to play for, essentially, in the Asia-Pacific region, and to provide a counterweight and a way of really looking for those opportunities for collaboration in a way to seize that opportunity, because we are seeing a rechanneling of investment. If you look at what Bloomberg New Energy Finance put out a few weeks ago around offshore wind investment, it's clear that that investment is now going away from the US and going towards Europe and Asia-Pacific region. So looking at the kind of trade dynamics and geopolitics, I think the key message is let's start somewhere. And we've already had some really good conversations, I think, today on this panel around how we can facilitate that kind of engagement and cross-learning between different Asia-Pacific countries, and also work on some practical ways forward, like tenders, like looking at auction frameworks, and also looking at that supply chain collaboration we were talking about earlier.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we've talked a lot about collaboration on this panel, obviously. So I think that it's really fitting that the last question for you, Michael, and also Sehi, feel free to jump in, is about the best practices. So what are the best practices on collaboration with the industry and other stakeholders, such as fisher peoples, fisheries, and local communities in offshore wind projects?
I think whether it's the best or it's one of the best, it's a good question. I think the Gippsland collaboration, all kind of stakeholders with Star of the South have been remarkable and likely best in class. Really early there was local engagement. There are more than 100 local contractors engaged even before we have any permit to build something. I have stopped at all the coffee shops in Gippsland, just went in there not saying anything, important research, and just sitting down there, and then people looked at me and said, well, is he a Aussie or what is he? No, he's apparently not. And then started talking about Star of the South, and then they all got super engaged, and I've had so many offers of jumping in a boat, being sailed out there, going fishing and everything. And what they of course can see is the transition of the local coal power plant workers to a new industry. So local economy, local jobs transitioning from something dying out, and that's the early explaining of what is offshore wind. So it didn't become something like a monster, but it was actually becoming something that they could actually see themselves in. Then there's one important thing we haven't discussed, that's infrastructure. And it goes also a little bit to local communities and engaging. There's a lot of places in the world where you can see basically special purpose-built vessels, special purpose-built harbors, and everything looks super cool. That's not what we should expect we will see in all new markets. And please, new markets, do not wait till you get there. Get started, because if you want to build the infrastructure before you start the projects, then it's the wrong order. In Australia, there have been a lot of discussions with harbors. Already back in 16, 17, we saw that we could use the two existing harbors, one for foundations, one for turbines. So it doesn't need to be perfect to get started, and get started is more important. And then local, it starts with the local people, absolutely.
Thank you, Michael. Sehi?
I'm not sure if we can call it the best practice, but I think the Korean legislative journey can definitely be a working example for countries going through similar challenges in the region, especially when it comes to stakeholder collaboration. After years of political debate, in February this year, our National Assembly passed the Offshore Wind Promotion Act, which sets the national framework for offshore wind expansion. And the passage of this act came after extensive discussions among industry stakeholders like yourself, fishers, local communities, and different industry groups. But the role of CSOs, I would like to highlight here, is that they really lubricated the connections, the discussions that the different stakeholders had, and it's something, and as a result, local stakeholders will now engage in discussions during the maritime spatial planning stage rather than only at the end of the development stage, which has been the case until now. So yeah, collaboration across stakeholders also helped the act gain cross-party support, which quite rare and which resulted in the act passing. And so yeah, the law will go into effect in next March. So we have a few months left until it goes into full force. And I just want to end by emphasizing the role of different stakeholders in the role of CSOs in bridging these conversations.
Maybe just to come in there briefly, I mean, thank you to SFOC for their partnership also in that agenda. I think we as a kind of collective pushing for the OSS bill to pass, etc., it was best in class collaboration even between some of the partners here. So paying tribute to the great work that you guys did on that, really good. And it's great to have you in Goa also from that perspective.
Thank you. And Michael, you mentioned Star of the South project. My family are actually from Gippsland, which is where that project's being built. So it's always really nice when people start talking about it. And I must admit, when I started this job, about 3 weeks in, I was sitting in Copenhagen on a call with someone from Teralgen, which is a tiny town in Gippsland. And I told all of my friends and family about it. I could not believe that I was thousands of kilometers away talking to someone that was, just down the road from my parents. So it's really nice to hear that that's happening. And I mean, that's an example of collaboration, isn't it? That we're sitting here in Copenhagen talking with people in those local communities. And it's obviously something that we're all agreed upon needs to continue to happen to get the messaging and get that education to, build offshore wind from the ground up, but then also from a regional level down. So we're just at the conclusion of the panel. If anyone would like to come in with some closing remarks, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, we'll throw it open to some Q&A. Amisha, to kick things off with the Q&A, let me pass the mic.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our panelists. Now, we've talked a lot about best practice and taking lessons from what's already been done. I was just wondering, I'd like the panel's perspectives on if we're advising emerging markets on anything that should be avoided from what we've learned from our mature markets. So lessons learned from that perspective.
I think there's a huge opportunity for emerging markets to leapfrog what some of the mature markets have been doing. And again, if we come back to this topic of auctions or of how you buy, how governments buy or tender for offshore wind projects, we've seen in some of the mature markets recently a need to reform auction policies. So this has happened in the UK, sorry, Michael, in Denmark. I'm not holding you personally responsible for that one, but... That's okay. Germany also going through the same thing at the moment. It's a real reset moment for the industry in these markets. And actually what we're starting to see is some really good progress coming out of the other side. But it's taken those markets, 20 years maybe to get to this point? When I look at the conversations we're having with governments like the Philippines, for instance, I'm just so energized by how they've soaked up all this learning in a super quick time, turned it round to then have what can become, I think, a best-in-class, world-class suite of policies and regulation in a very, very short space of time. So I think it's all those lessons that we've learned, all the pitfalls that should be avoided. Actually, now we're having a really good moment and coming in to help push forward policy in emerging markets so that they can leapfrog the mistakes that we have made. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity for leadership in the global south and emerging markets. So, yeah, that's my perspective on it.
Thanks, Rebecca.
I was chatting with someone the other day, and they said to me, no matter what policy we do, whatever the topic, there's always going to be an issue. And so they said, what we have to do is actually get to decisions faster. So don't just talk about it for 7 years and still have an issue at the end. Let's get to a decision after 1 year, after 6 months, and then just make it happen and work through it.
Some strong words.
Yeah, just a few remarks to that one. I think part of why it is basically failing in some places is that the need for the electrons have not been unlocked. So the missing electrification In APAC, there seems to be a lot of need for green electrons. So I think the need is definitely there. Then I think the zero failure culture around politicians or civil servants helping them. And this is not pointing fingers, because it can also be lack of resources. But it is not okay that it takes more than 10 years to do permit and consenting for an offshore wind farm. That's not doable. If we want to basically get this industry up going, it needs to be faster. Not jeopardizing anything around birds and sea life or anything in the environmental. That's not what the industry is after, but there needs to be more speed in processing things. So I think some of the things that have been not so good in some of the markets, that's the missing leadership. There have been a lot of knowing what to do, and partly there have also been decided what to do, but the doing has been missing. And I think APAC have a better transition or a better way of actually taking this leadership, know, decide, and then go doing it, because that will be important.
Thank you, Michael. I think we've got time for one more question over here.
Right. Hi, Liz Milan from SFOC. I have a question regarding because in the APEC region, especially like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and we have seen this increasing local opposition toward offshore wind, and in certain cases somehow become very politicized. So it's become offshore wind become a political choice instead of something that's energy or resilient choice. And we have seen increasing oppositions or misinformation, fake news about offshore wind. So I was wondering, from your perspective, I mean, how do we as an industry or alliance to better address these issues?
Yeah, so was the question, Milan, about opposition, fake news, misinformation? Yeah. I mean,
So one practical thing we did in Australia, and it's underway at the moment, is actually we have a Senate inquiry, so a senior government official inquiry into mis and disinformation. And the number of things that are coming out of that are just incredible. They haven't yet released the report, but when that's released, you'll see that it's some of the misinformation comes from one article or one person saying a quote without any fact check or fact base, and then it just gets disseminated everywhere. So it's something I think we all need to tackle and tackle together. It's a very severe and real issue and challenge.
yeah, it's a really interesting question. As you were asking the question, I was thinking about my own experience of seeing some of the disinformation then that I know has kind of come from Europe and then popped up in Korea, or has come from wherever, the US, and popped up in Taiwan. And thinking about the way that disinformation moves and how pernicious it is and how targeted it is. And I think as an industry, we do need to obviously, go out there very proactively and make the case for the technology that we're representing, and our belief in the fact that that technology is going to benefit people and their lives and their countries and their livelihoods. That's really important, and that's very fair. But I think when it comes to disinformation, we shouldn't underestimate that this is a targeted campaign against wind, right? This is a globally targeted campaign against wind energy, and it's being put forward by opponents of renewables, opponents of wind. And I think we should just call that out for what it is and mobilize against it. And we're up against some very powerful actors with deep pockets, for sure. It's going to take more than just us in this room to solve some of those challenges and problems. And I think, paying tribute also to the work that I know that the UN is doing on information. Sorry, I've forgotten the UN term now. It's information integrity, that's it. Code for disinformation. And also other actors in this space, in the communication space also, who are really trying to tackle this at the root cause and the source. So I think that where that leads me to is that absolutely we should be out there making a very positive and proactive case for the technologies that we represent in the communities that it's going to affect, definitely. but also as a sector, as a movement, as a community, we need to wake up to the fact that this is a campaign against us, and we need to act very quickly, rapidly, and strategically in order to counter that pernicious campaign. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Angela. Both very good answers to that question. And yeah, it's a very big topic at the moment that we're all trying to come back together. In the essence of time, I will have to wrap up the panel, but I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been a wonderful conversation. We've covered a lot of really important points, and I think the key message here is that we need to keep collaborating and keep talking in order to keep these conversations going and really strengthen offshore wind deployment within APAC and then across the world as well. So thank you very much for joining us. We have no more closing remarks, so I'm going to end the session there. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.